We're teaching a class on platters, and in order to illustrate what students are going to be learning, I decided I would make a platter of my own and have it ready for us to share via this video. So I'm into wood storage, and I've selected a board that's a full 3/4 of an inch thickness, which is a good place to start. I'm using soft maple. It's not the best wood. In fact, you can actually see grain tear out even on the board as I get ready to cut it to length. So first thing I'm going to do is just cut a square off, or close to a square. I'll trim it up later at the bandsaw to get it perfectly square. Square's not important, but it does make lining and finding the center a little simpler. So there's my piece to start with. I'll go to the bandsaw, and now that I've accurately measured the width and length of this piece and set the fence properly, I can trim this to being closer to being a perfect square. As you can see on this bandsaw, it has a fairly wide blade, so for me to cut the edge of this into a perfect round will be kind of difficult. In fact, it'll be almost impossible. The blade won't turn that tight of a curve. So what I'm going to do is to take one of my sanding sticks. It's got a fairly decent straight edge on it, and connect the cross corners, which will help me find the dead center of the piece. And that will give me a place to at least lay out what a perfect circle will be. Take a compass, set it to the largest diameter I can come up with, mark that out, and then trim off as much of the corners as I can. Once I get the piece of wood on the lathe, I can make it perfectly round, which is one of the first steps I'll have to do anyway. So I have something to guide my hand and my eye. For the work I do, the wider bandsaw blade works better because I am trimming and cutting rather than shaping, and this has never been the need for the smaller blade. When I cut larger pieces of wood, the thinner blade becomes a difficulty. And as you can see, I can just trim away the corners little by little. Be cautious if you do this. It's so easy to put your hand on the corner and push the piece of wood into the bandsaw blade, have it drop out of the kerf, and take the tip of your thumb or finger. Keep your hands from in front of the blade. So now, the wood is 3/4 of an inch thick. This one happens to be right on the mark. I want 1/8 of an inch reserved for a recess for the chuck later on. And I want the bottom of the platter to be approximately 1/4 of an inch thick. So that means I need to save 3/8 of an inch. So I'm going to take the drill and drill a hole to a depth of everything but the final 3/8. It's my habit to wrap the blade with a piece of tape and leave a flag out, a little tag sticking out. And what that will do is, as the drill bit approaches the surface of the wood, that flag will drag on the surface and you'll know that you're at depth. I found when we just wrap it with tape and maybe make several holes of the same dimension, tape sometimes gets moved a little bit and the holes tend to get a little bit deeper accidentally. You can see the flag house flying around here. Unfortunately, you can't see the drilling. I put my hand right in front of the camera, so trust me that we're going down until that flag begins to wipe the chips away from the wood. And you can see how clear it is right next to the hole. Okay, so that's our first mounting. We're going to mount on the lathe using the screw chuck, but since it's a shallow hole, we're going to have to put a couple of spacing washers on the screw chuck. Mounting the screw chuck requires us to get the chuck properly centered into the four-jaw chuck. I wiggle a little bit to be sure that I've got it well centered. And since now it's too long, I've cut a couple of washers, plywood, that will keep the screw chuck from going too deep. I'm screwing on nice and tight. If it's a soft wood, be cautious of over-tightening because you could strip out the thread easily and then have to find another way to mount. Well, it's as flat as we can get it, but I can see from looking at it that it is not running perfectly true. So I'm just going to flatten up this side for a little bit. Most of this wood will be turned away anyway, so a lot of effort in flattening this is unnecessary. This is the bottom that you're looking at for now. So that'll kind of square it up. The tool is rotated at 45 degrees, the flute. The handle is down at another 45-degree angle. And all I'm doing is literally leaning backwards and pulling the tool across the face of the wood, thus squaring it up. And it's not perfect, but that's okay. So I now need to take care of that edge, the one that we trimmed as close as we could. Absolutely avoid attacking the edge. I've got the tool at 45 degrees rotation, and I'm coming from one face across the edge towards the opposite edge. If I stick the tool straight into that edge, I'll run into end grain and almost certainly get tear out. Here's what it looks like from the other side. The tool is cutting across the fibers of the wood. It's being done this way because I didn't want to cut all the way across. I didn't want that tear out to happen on the other side. So I went most of the way and then finished the cut coming in the opposite direction to catch any piece. So now it's just a matter of continuing this process until the piece is round. We're cutting end grain, side grain, end grain, side grain, because this is a cross grain piece of wood. If you have tear out on that end grain, you need to clear it up. It's easier to do it right now while they have plenty of mass to support the cuts. So now we need to create a rebate into which the chuck will expand when we turn the piece around. So I've measured the width of the chuck jaws when they are fully closed and transferred a mark onto the face. And a pencil helps you see it a little bit better. When that's cut out, the four-jaw scroll chuck will be able to expand into that opening. And I noted I needed this to be 1/8 of an inch deep. I know it's not very deep, but it will hold very well. So I've set my calipers to mark off that eighth of an inch. And I'm using the tip of a skew chisel so I can go straight down. The chucks we use in our classes have a straight jaw, and we need to be sure that side of that rebate is as square as we can make it so we have a good grab. Now moving the skew horizontally just enough to create clearance so I can continue to go deeper. I'll take the rest of the mass out of the center in a minute with the gouge. The handle is straight and the tip is facing straight in. We'll have a nice sharp shoulder. And checking it with the calipers, I'm at my 1/8 inch. So that's going to be how the piece is held when we return it around and do the other side. Remember, this is the back. And so what we're now going to do is to say, okay, for my platter, how big is the foot? How big around should the foot be? Good reference is to take a look at your dinner plates at home and decide that what, 30–40% of the diameter is minimal, because if it's too small, it will not be stable. So this area that I'm cleaning up right now, inside of that expanding location, will become part of the final foot. And so we're going to take this part right here to completion. We're going to get it cleaned up to an 1/8 inch depth. Any sanding or decorating that needs to be done should be done, because we will not have an opportunity at a later date to come back and work in this area again. We'll be holding the piece in that area for our final cuts. So I'm using just a shallow fluted gouge to take a few passes across here and get this relatively flat. At this point, it's time to complete it. We're going to do sanding. I'll go through all my grits. You are working near the center of rotation, so sanding in the very center of this piece is going to be somewhat difficult. So moving the paper a lot is important to get a nice surface across that center. Trying not to touch that shoulder, which we cut with the tip of the skew chisel. Well, I have a habit of always marking the bottom of my pieces with a few decorative lines. So I'm using a 3-point tool, a pyramid tool, to put 3 decorative lines on the bottom, just as simply to show it's been worked on and we haven't just left the piece. So at this point, a little extra sanding might be the only other thing we want to do to clean up any fuzzes from that line cutting. And at this point, the bottom center of the platter is completed. So I'm going to mark off how big around I want the foot to be. This is where the bottom of the foot is going to end. So from that pencil mark out to the rim becomes the rim. And I have to decide what the shape of that's going to be. It could be flat, it could be curved outward, it could be curved inward. This is a matter of your artistic desire, your choice. I'm going to true it up, and I'm going to eventually make a slight curve so that the rim of the platter curves downward when you look at the face of the platter. The way I'm doing that is with a 3/8 bowl gouge, and if you watch my left hand, that's pulling the tool forward, and my right hand, and basically the thumb that you see in the picture, is pushing the tool backwards, so we're making an arc. The handle is going towards the center of the lathe. This creates a curved undercut. Now I'm deciding that the rim of the platter sits pretty near the top surface, so I'm taking about 2/3 of the thickness of the piece away from the bottom side. And you can see the curve beginning to develop. My thumb is the pivot point around which the tool is moving. When the shape is right, you could turn the tool upside down and use it as a shear scraper to clean up any small areas, any bubbles. I've had my hand on the other side of the platter for support and stability. As the platter gets thinner, you'll begin to hear high-pitched sounds, which is an indication that the wood is thin. So my hand on the back side provides additional support and steadiness for the cuts. And at this point, that can be sanded and finished. I'm using a reciprocal sander here. The rotating sandpaper randomizes the scratch patterns and works pretty well on the outside shapes. Towards the center, where the wood is moving around a single point, they're not very effective. So power sanding in that area is much more effective. Dead center of a bowl or a platter. I'm also breaking the corner on the edge because it is sharp at this point, and if you run your finger into it, it will cut. And so this still looks relatively square, but it's going to prevent me from getting hurt. Or staining the wood, actually, too. Soft maple is pretty hard to get all of the sanding marks out and the torn grain. You see a lot of white spots on there that'll have to be hand sanded until that is complete. So we're taking it off with a screw chuck because the back is basically done. Now close the jaws down, put them inside that recess, press firmly against the headstock, and expand the jaws into that 1/8 inch recess. That's a lot of wood there holding that in place. It's a pretty solid hold, even though it seems very shallow. Now I'm looking straight down and I'm trying to transfer the beginning of the rim from the back side to the front side, so I can kind of have an idea of where the rim starts and stops, at least on both sides, trying to match them. So I'm going to work on the rim first, and we know we have a shape that's kind of curved downward. So what we can do here is begin to try to match that shape a little bit. Again, the tool is down at a 45-degree angle, rotated about a 45-degree angle so that we are cutting very smoothly in a shear angle across those fibers. And just continue to do that over and over again until the shape we want is found. Now, shaping the rim is really up to you. What shape would you like to have, whether it's rounded or flat, in aimed or outside aimed, whichever direction. And how we separate the bowl from the rim, whether we put a decorative mark in there, a bead, a shadow line. These are all your options. Again, I'm using my fingers on the back side because the thickness is getting thinner and thinner. I'm down to 1/4 of an inch approximately thickness right now. So pressing hard on the outside edge of this will cause the wood to vibrate. And so I'm keeping my finger on the back side to stiffen the cut. Pressing lightly with the tool, supporting it on the opposite side with my finger. And it shouldn't burn your fingers because you will have sanded that area and it should be reasonably smooth. And I'm checking the wall thickness so that from the rim down to the center, it's approximately the same thickness. I've changed to a push cut here. I can get a pretty smooth cut this direction, but there is a danger if I don't stop when I get to that shoulder ahead of me there. I'll have a big catch because I'll have an open tool going straight into the wood. So I got to be cautious to know where to stop. I'm doing this cut because I want to keep going deeper into this area here. It's not rounded enough. So now I've taken the tool and turned it straight across the wood, and I'm pushing straight down to create a very sharp shoulder. This is going to be a bead eventually. Now I'm cutting into the bowl. The tool is again at a 45-degree angle, but I'm facing towards the center of the project. And we'd like to cut at the same speed all the way across, but that's not possible because as we get closer to the center, the wood is moving past the cutting edge at a slower and slower pace. So the speed of my cut as I get towards the center continues to slow down. Don't push harder, just wait. So I'm creating a bowl shape. In order not to go too deep, all I have to do is not hit the bottom of that hole. There's still a little bit of the drill bit hole remaining, as you can see right in the center, not much. But when that disappears, I know I'm at 1/4 of an inch thickness between the bottom and the bottom of the bowl portion of the platter. With constant pressure, you can see how much slower the cut is going as I get right towards the center. And it's gone. Now I want to make one last cut. I want to get a nice clean bottom across there. And before I make my last cuts, I almost always go back to the sharpening system and put a keen new edge on my tool. Just takes a couple of seconds and I'll get a much crisper, smoother, cleaner cut. And it's worth taking a few seconds to do this. Now that final cut. Doing what we call a shear cut. That's where I'm riding the side of the bevel against the face and rolling the tools into the cut. If I roll it too far, I'll get a catch and it'll be a pretty severe cut. But if I don't go too far, I get a very clean bottom. Little shear scraping. And rounding the outside edge up. Now I could leave it like that and just have a nice shoulder. I could cut that down and make it into a bead. I could turn it away and make it a groove. There's a lot of options, but I like separating the bowl from the rim on a platter by some means or another. Now I'm going to use power sanding here only because I'm in the center of rotation where I don't have much movement from the sandpaper if I'm just using a reciprocal sander. So I can go back and forth there. I can do the rim with this also. You can see some white spots in the center and specifically on the rim. And that's places where there's some very small amount of tear out that's created a whitish look. So I've got to hit all of those spots carefully, and you can see me working on that rim area. That's the nature of this wood I chose to use. I could have done better. Now the edge is always something people like to treat, and my recommendation on thin walls is to sand it into round or sand a flat on there rather than trying to take a tool and cut. There's not much wood there, and when we hit the end grain with a cutting tool, it's very difficult to prevent a major catch and tear out, or tearing the whole piece up for that matter. So I recommend early on using sandpaper. I decided I was going to do a little decoration on this thing. I think this is above and beyond what's necessary for a basic platter. But I've decided to put a little bit of burn line decorations on. So I've mounted a indexing wheel. I have a platform that goes in the tool rest that can be adjusted to many different heights. And I've set it as low as I possibly can, which is going to create lines, as you'll see in a minute, that appear to be at an angle. The device I'm inserting right there is a means of engaging the holes in that indexing wheel. And I've marked off 24 holes with a felt marker. And I'm going to burn a line at each of those 24 locations. We've set that up so that it's engaged. And the platform will allow me to just slide the burning tool horizontally very smoothly. I have several different platforms for different purposes, but this one, you can see where the line is going to go, very near the bottom rotation. I have a wood burning tool that's really old, not on the market anymore, but still works fine. And I've taken one of the knives, mounted it between a couple of wooden blocks that will slide smoothly along that table. And this is how I'm going to burn those marks in. I need to make sure that I have the temperature set at the right location and the right heat. So I took one of the corner cutoffs, and I'm going to just check it to see that I've got the temperature where I'd like it to be. As soon as I'm satisfied that it's heated up where I want it, that goes in the trash. And now I'm going to engage the first of those 24 dark lines, and I'm going to burn the first line on. This is at full natural speed. It takes several seconds to move slowly between the two little grooved lines I had previously put in there. So I'm going to go to the next 24 position. This takes a little time. And it's going to get boring. So let's speed it up and get through all the 24 of those lines as fast as we can. I wish I could go this fast. There is a groove that I'm starting in, and there's a groove I'm ending in. And so I'm trying to be very cautious that I don't go beyond it on either ends. So here's coming up to 24. And that's not enough lines. I need another set of 24. I need to split those and do it one more time. So I'm going to move to a spot between those two dark marks on the wheel. There's a smaller mark. And I'm going to go 24 again. And you've seen me do this, so it's going to look exactly the same. And there's the 24. So now we got 48 lines around there. That looks a little bit better. But I need to crisp up both of those grooves on either side. So I've taken a piece of countertop material, stuck in that groove, and just hold it until it burns. That creates a burned mark. These are samples I got at the local Home Depot store back in the home improvement section, the countertop materials. And you see how that marks that out. Now there's a little overburn. You can see some of the lines are not too crisp, and that is taken care of easily with just a little bit of 220 sanding to take care of that overburn, and a few strokes and we'll get that all done. Now I need to turn the platter back around a second time. I press it against my vacuum chuck. I'm using a piece of sandpaper against the center, which remember we did and completed in the very beginning. And I'm pressing in with my tailstock assembly. The sandpaper grit is facing the wood, so if anything slips, it'll slip between the metal and the sandpaper and not put unnecessary marks on the bottom. The fact I have a vacuum chuck makes it easy for me to clean up this last little bit. Jumbo jaws, cold jaws, longware chucks, other devices like that, all will work in holding the edge of that platter while we go up and do a little bit of sanding on it. So we're finally to the place we just put a couple of coats of finish on it. As I said before, this is soft maple, so it's sort of like a sponge. It was amazing to me how much of the Minwax wipe-on poly it took soaking into it on the first coat. But since I'm using a poly, I recognize that the first coat will soak in a lot. And so I'm going to dab on as much as I can, let it soak in as much as it can, and then I'll take a paper towel and wipe any of the excess off. I'll do both sides at the same time. The edges, do the back. If this is going to be used for food, the Minwax wipe on poly will be food safe once it's totally dry and all the odors are gone. The only thing will be remaining was a little of tongue oil, a little bit of urethane oil, a little bit of urethane copolymers, I should say. That's coat number one. We're going to let that dry. I'll put it into my summer baking oven. Let that dry in the sun and wind. And after it's been dried, we can sand it, put on the second or third coat if necessary, and do the same thing over and over again. In the summer, I can get a coat a day easily. And when I'm done, I'm going to buff it. And I'm simply using Tripoli. I'm not going for a real high shine. I just want a smooth surface. So after all the finishes are dry, I'm buffing with Tripoli, which will create a very, very smooth surface. It's about 800 grit. If I went with white diamond, it might bring up a higher sheen, and I just didn't particularly choose to do that with this product. So it's been buffed out. And my last thing I'm going to do is I almost always put a coat of wax on my product. Wax makes it feel good. It protects a little bit more. If it's handled, fingerprints won't appear. The wax tends to obliterate the fingerprints. So a quick coat, I'm using a wax that's very similar to Renaissance wax, which is readily available, and just buff it out. And that's the first sample project. Finished another video. This one was a fairly simple one for doing platters. A technique that's easy to do, easy to add various different kinds of embellishments to the rim of the plates and so on. I'm enjoying it so much I might do another one and demonstrate some other techniques for simple decorations. Unfortunately, I picked the wrong wood. This was a piece of soft maple, and it has a tendency to have tear out on the end grains. It's pretty bad. Sharp tools, high speeds are the only thing that can address it, and I did the best we could. Enjoy having you as viewers. Stay subscribed. Keep sending me your questions and your comments. I really do appreciate them. And any suggestions for future projects, I would encourage you to put into the comments down here. Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon in the next video.